Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our discussion about mindfulness at work. My name is Barbara Scoville, and I am president of the Salt Lake City Alumni Club, and I am delighted to moderate today's discussion. Before I introduce our brilliant speakers, I want to encourage everyone listening live to submit questions at any time for our presenters through the chat, and we will address them towards the end of the presentation. We also received some questions during registration, and we will make sure to get to those as well. This event is co-sponsored by the College of Social Work, and we are pleased to hear from Adam Hanley, assistant professor at the college, and Barbara Scoville, an alumna of the college. Just a little bit about Adam and his work. He is a licensed psychologist and an assistant professor at the Center on Mindfulness and Integrative Health Intervention Development in the College of Social Work. The goal of his research program is to develop and refine both brief and intensive mindfulness-based interventions that can be embedded in medical settings to treat pain and addiction, as well as improve quality of life. And Barbara has been a therapist for 20 years, and her practice combines Western psychology, evidence-based practices from neuroscience, and the wisdom traditions. She emboldens her clients toward their own inner self-compassion, joy, and healing. She is a graduate of the College of Social Work, a certified mindfulness meditation teacher, and a member of the International Mindfulness Meditation Teachers Association. She lives in South Jordan with her family and dogs, and she is passionate about learning, knitting, nature, and being involved in humanitarian activities. So if you're listening live, grab a pen and paper to take notes. There will be tons of great information shared here today, and I will turn the time over to Adam.
Great. Thank you, Bailey. And I'm pleased and excited to be here today. So I'm going to try to share my screen and hopefully we'll be off and running. Beautiful. So my name is Adam Hanley. I'm an assistant professor at the College of Social Work here at the University of Utah. And I work specifically in the center called the Center on Mindfulness and Integrative Health Intervention Development, which is a long title that we often abbreviate into C-MIIND. And I'm going to talk today about some research we've conducted at C-MIIND that supports the benefits of mindfulness. And then I'm going to review a study detailing how you might be able to integrate mindfulness into your daily life, no matter what you're doing in that moment. In fact, I'm going to suggest that mindfulness can transform even your most dreaded chore into a meditation practice. And we'll see if you buy it. We'll chat about it at the end. So throughout my time today, I'm going to use a few line graphs, some bar charts, maybe even some ratios in hopes of providing you with a conceptual understanding of the benefits of mindfulness. And I'm going to try to convince you that mindfulness can improve your life. But you aren't going to have to take my word for it. The real show here is we're going to start in the second half of the hour when Barbara guides us through a mindfulness practice to provide you with a more experiential understanding of mindfulness. And I really want to contrast the conceptual understanding of mindfulness with the experiential understanding of mindfulness, because I think this is a really important distinction to start out with that's captured by an old Zen adage that you may or may not be familiar with. And this adage cautions us that a finger pointing at the moon is not the moon. The finger is needed to know where to look for the moon, but if we mistake the finger for the moon itself, we're never going to know the real moon. So that to say, I'm going to be pointing here for the next few minutes. And hopefully I'll be pointing us in the right direction. So let's start with a definition of mindfulness. And Jon Kabat-Zinn offers the most commonly used definition, suggesting that mindfulness means paying attention in a particular way. So paying attention on purpose, in the present moment, and non-judgmentally. And we'll break that down as we go along. But it's also common to think of mindfulness as this sort of state of mind, right? It's kind of blissed out, sort of Zen place. But I think it can actually be more helpful to think of mindfulness as a three-step process, where first, you intentionally focus on something. And it really doesn't matter what. It could be the breath, it could be the body, it could be a sound, it could be a pile of dirty dishes, and that's a little bit of foreshadowing. So you focus on something, and then second, the mind wanders off, perhaps to a thought, an emotion, a sensation. And then third, you notice that the mind has wandered. And this cycle of mindfulness starts all over again when you return attention back to that original object of mindfulness. So mindfulness isn't necessarily about cultivating a clear, calm state of mind, although serenity is commonly realized during mindfulness practice. I like to think of mindfulness as more of a mental training exercise, very similar to a physical training exercise, with each instance of mind wandering being just like a mental push-up of sorts. So every time your mind wanders and you bring attention back to that object of mindfulness, whether the breath, whether the body or those dishes, your mind is getting stronger. You are strengthening your mindfulness in that moment. And over time, with continued practice, you'll be able to focus for longer and longer periods of time, even when distractions are competing for your attention. And if you think about it, internal distractions like worries, concerns, thoughts, emotions, sensations are really no different than external distractions like email notifications or phone calls, these things that pop up and disrupt our focus during the day. And as you become less reactive to internal distractions like thoughts and emotions during mindfulness practice, you're also becoming less reactive to those external distractions while at work, and vice versa. They work hand in hand. So there's many different ways to practice mindfulness. And today we're going to try to group mindfulness practices into two broad categories: formal mindfulness practices and informal mindfulness practices. Trying to give a little something for everybody here, a buffet of sorts. And so seated meditation and yoga are examples of formal mindfulness practices. And they're probably what you think about when somebody talks about mindfulness. And the bulk of mindfulness research has examined these more formal mindfulness practices. And you can see these pretty complex diagrams here. And that can give you an indication of just how closely researchers have examined what happens during a mindfulness practice. But there's also informal mindfulness practices, like washing the dishes or sweeping a floor, or maybe even filling out an expense report. And there's only a handful of research studies that have examined these informal practices, but I find them potentially intriguing and potentially relevant to bringing mindfulness into your everyday work. So we're going to review research suggesting that both types of practice, both formal and informal, can be beneficial. But let's start by looking at formal mindfulness training. So at C-MIIND, we've been developing and researching a formal mindfulness-based therapy. It's called Mindfulness-Oriented Recovery Enhancement, or MORE for short. And MORE was developed by Dr. Eric Garland, the director of C-MIIND, with support from the National Institute of Health, from whom we've been lucky to receive several multi-million-dollar research grants to explore this treatment. And MORE combines three therapeutic ingredients. It involves mindfulness training to increase attentional control and increase focus. It involves mindful coping as a way to decrease pain and stress. And it involves mindful savoring in order to teach people how to increase pleasure and live a little more fully. And so to date, MORE has been tested in 4 large randomized controlled trials that have involved about 500 chronic pain patients with opioid misuse or opioid use disorder, and the results are promising. So in the largest and most recent of these research studies, we partnered with the University of Utah primary care clinics to provide treatment to 250 chronic pain patients that were misusing prescription opioids. And we randomized these patients to receive either 8 weeks of MORE or 8 weeks of supportive psychotherapy, and then followed these folks for 9 months after treatment ended. So this was a pretty long and involved research study. Now, before treatment, all of the patients in this trial were misusing prescription opioids. But by the 9-month follow-up point, about half of the patients that received more were no longer misusing opioids, and more than a third of the more patients were able to cut their opioid dose in half. And we also found that more significantly decreased pain interference and pain severity. And these pain drops weren't insignificant. They were larger, actually, than those typically observed from cognitive behavioral therapy, which is the gold standard psychological treatment for chronic pain. But that wasn't all. More also simultaneously decreased depression, decreased PTSD symptoms, decreased alcohol use, and improved psychological well-being. So we're pretty pleased with these results and are currently working to make more available to more patients. So that's my first sort of gambit in trying to convince you that mindfulness can change your life, because those are pretty substantial changes over the course of 9 months. But you don't have to be a chronic pain patient to benefit from the mindfulness techniques taught in MORE. They can also be useful for decreasing stress and emotional distress, as well as increasing focus and well-being. And let's take a closer look at how. So in MORE, we don't present mindfulness practice as a distraction technique or some sort of pain avoidance strategy. In fact, it's just the opposite. In MORE, we teach people how to use mindfulness to look directly at their pain, whether they're experiencing physical pain or emotional pain. And an interesting thing happens when we look close enough at pain. It's really similar to the same thing that happens when we look closely at this image. Now, when you look at this image, most people see a boy. Some people even think he looks a little sad. But if we were to zoom in on this image, as if looking at it through a microscope, that sad boy disappears. And we find that this image is actually made of many little colored dots. The boy disappears and is replaced by dots of color. And we can do the same thing with pain, whether physical or emotional, because the experience that most of us call pain or anxiety or depression can actually be broken down into 4 parts. And certainly it's more complex than this, but this is just a rough heuristic. So the first is kind of the unpleasant sensation involved in that experience. Maybe a sharpness if we're talking about physical pain, or a jitteriness if we're talking about anxiety. And then overlaid on that are the thoughts about that sensation, like this is unbearable, or I can't handle this right now. And then on top of that, sometimes we lay emotions that are tied to those thoughts, like perhaps sadness, anger, and anxiety. And then on top of all of this, we overlay this behavioral aspect, the things that we do to try to cope with present pain or to avoid future pain. So these are the 4 parts of pain or distress or anxiety, and we don't often think of them as discrete or independent. But if we look close enough, if we mindfully observe our experience in the moment, we often find that they can be. And we can think of this first part of the pain model, the sensations, as more biologically based. And the remaining parts, the thoughts, the emotions, the behaviors, is the more psychological aspects of pain or discomfort. And what we try to do in MORE is separate out the more biological aspects of pain from the more psychological parts of pain. Just observing sensations before things start to snowball into that thought, emotion kind of escalation. So, for example, if you were to mindfully attend to some tightness in your chest before giving a presentation, you might be curious whether that sensation of tightness, does it have a center? Does it have edges? Is that sensation solid, or maybe are there spaces inside that sensation where sensation is not? Just being curious. And if you were going to mindfully zoom in and observe that tightness, you might be curious about the quality of that sensation. That tightness, does it change? Right? Does tightness stay the same across time, or does tightness maybe become tingling? And maybe tingling become warmth? Is there movement or change in the quality of sensation? And if you were zooming in, you might be curious whether the intensity of that sensation changes. Perhaps that sensation becomes weaker. Or maybe that sensation grows a little more intense. It reaches a peak and then gradually becomes weaker. You also might be curious if there are thoughts or emotions associated with that sensation, and just noticing them, right? No need to follow them down this trail of proliferation, just noticing, am I having a thought that's associated with this? And then letting it go and returning awareness back to that sensation. Because I think what we find over time, that sensations change all the time. But that part of the mind that's able to notice and observe sensations, it's always there. This kind of calm, pervasive background that can hold all of these changes and momentary fluctuations. And so noticing tightness in the chest mindfully and non-judgmentally is a very different experience than noticing tightness in the chest and jumping to that interpretation that this tightness is a problem. Perhaps it's an imminent heart attack. Perhaps this is a real problem, which often, well, not often, we'll say sometimes can escalate into a panic attack, heightened emotional arousal, and then maybe behaviorally calling 911. So if we can sit in that space of bare awareness and noticing, deconstructing sensation and the mental and the emotional proliferation, then maybe we take the edge off that moment. Maybe things feel a little more manageable. And I think this quote captures pretty nicely why we're trying to do this, suggesting that pain is inevitable. Suffering is optional. The arrow of pain does not need to be followed by that arrow of suffering. We call this technique in more zooming in, and it can be really helpful in dealing with both physical and emotional pain. And I encourage you to play with it. And an easy way to remember how to practice zooming in is with the STOP technique. And STOP is an acronym where the S stands for stop, just stopping whatever you're doing. And the T stands for take a few deep breaths in order to begin relaxing the body, maybe quieting the mind. The O stands for observe, where you're hopefully going to observe thoughts, feelings, sensations as they come and go. And the question here is, can you separate out the sensations from thoughts? And maybe can you separate thoughts from emotions? And then can you separate emotions from behavior? Just watching and observing. And then the P stands for proceed with purpose, deciding what you need in that moment. If you're really having a heart attack, maybe that need is calling 911. Or if you're just a little anxious, maybe it's taking a few long breaths and bringing attention back to the present moment. But in more, we don't stop there. We don't just use mindfulness to decrease pain and stress. We use mindfulness to increase pleasure as well. Because we can also be mindful of pleasant objects, pleasant events and experiences through savoring. And mindful savoring means that you become aware of and enjoy the sights, the sounds, the smells, the tastes of the world around you. Really using your senses to drink in, to really bring in that pleasant experience. And mindful savoring can help you cope by shifting the focus of your attention away from pain or distress. So when you feel bad, the painful parts of life tend to become the central focus, right? This is all we can think about. Positive things tend to fade into the background and the field of awareness, right? Like what's available just kind of constricts around that negative, painful experience. In some ways, you kind of develop this pain tunnel vision. But when you savor, we're working to reverse this process. We make the pleasant parts of life the central focus and let those unpleasant parts just fade into the background. And we don't have to ignore or push away the unpleasant things. We can just allow them to be there, but noticing, appreciating, and expanding on pleasant things can make unpleasant things smaller, less important by comparison. And this isn't just happening in the abstract, right? So these are images we collected from the same 250 chronic pain patients from a few slides back. And before and after treatment, we gave the patients 2 markers and asked them to do some coloring. So we gave them a red marker and asked them to color anywhere on this mannequin where they were currently feeling unpleasant sensations. And we gave them a blue marker and asked them to color anywhere where they were currently feeling pleasant sensations. Now, that blue marker caused a little bit of confusion. We needed to, offer a little guidance around how to use that. But clearly, the bodies of patients receiving more were much more pleasant places after treatment. In some ways, more created the space to kind of bring pleasure back into the body. But not everyone has the time or the motivation or the need even to attend 8 two-hour therapy sessions. So we were also curious if we could boil the principles of more down into a single brief training session. So we partnered with the University of Utah Orthopedic Clinic and began providing a mindfulness training session to patients before they underwent knee and hip replacement surgery. And in this study, we randomized 285 surgical patients to one of 3 preoperative interventions. They either got a brief mindfulness training, a hypnotic suggestion session, or a cognitive behavioral pain psychoeducation session. And we found that 15 minutes of mindfulness or hypnosis had an immediate impact on these surgical patients, on how they felt. Patients randomized to mindfulness or hypnosis reported significantly less pain, and they reported significantly less anxiety. Now, there was no real differences between mindfulness and hypnosis on these 3 outcomes, but patients randomized to mindfulness also reported an immediate decrease in their pain medication desire. So 15 minutes seems to have a pretty substantial impact on how people feel in the moment. And we also found that patients in this, we also had the patients in this study colored, where they were feeling pleasant and unpleasant sensations, and found that mindfulness and hypnosis immediately and dramatically changed the state of the body, similar to what we saw in our 8-week intervention. So I think it's interesting to think here that these results together may suggest that our traditional pain management strategies that focus exclusively on pain reduction potentially could be lacking. Maybe what we really need as complement are pleasure cultivation strategies, and perhaps mindfulness and hypnosis could offer some tools along those lines. So clearly mindfulness and hypnosis had immediate benefits, but was it possible that a 15-minute training before surgery could influence these patients' post-operative recovery? And so to find out, we followed up with these patients after their surgery, and at their 6-week follow-up appointment, the patients that got mindfulness training before surgery reported significantly better physical functioning. In fact, the patients that received preoperative mindfulness training were found to have physical function levels at their 6-week follow-up appointment similar to what would be expected at the 3-month follow-up appointment. Now, we were also pretty surprised by these results. We wanted to try and replicate. And in a follow-up study, we followed over 100 knee and hip replacement patients during the first month after surgery and found that, again, preoperative mindfulness training improved postoperative outcomes, decreasing postoperative pain and decreasing postoperative use. So results from both these studies indicate a brief preoperative mindfulness training may be able to improve postoperative recovery for a lot of patients. And importantly, these trainings required very little time, and these practices were pretty easy for patients to learn. But is it possible to be even more efficient? So we're going to kind of round out my time with this. So growing evidence from our center and many other research projects suggest that mindfulness can improve mental and physical health. But for many people, finding the time and the space to sit quietly and practice mindfulness can seem practically impossible. Now, if we can't stretch time and we can't create more space, then perhaps rethinking what we consider to be a mindfulness practice can make the benefits of mindfulness more accessible to more people. So this last study was guided by the belief that informal mindfulness practices, such as dishwashing, could be the solution to this accessibility problem. And now I recognize that dishwashing may initially appear an odd choice, but everyone has to eat, right? Dishes are part of our daily life. And if we could transform a task that is deeply embedded in daily life into an opportunity for mindfulness, then already we're starting to shift the context of mindfulness practice. We're taking it off the meditation cushion and bringing it into daily life. So we randomized a set of 51 students to wash some dishes after reading one of 2 passages. And the mindfulness dishwashing passage was adapted from Thich Nhat Hanh's The Miracle of Mindfulness, which is a beautiful book, and I strongly recommend it. So this passage went something like, while washing the dishes, one should only be washing the dishes. This means that while washing the dishes, one should be completely aware of the fact that one is washing the dishes. And the traditional dishwashing passage was adapted from the internet, reading, prepare the water, so forth and so on. And the results here indicated that participants that read the mindful dishwashing passage, didn't have any instruction other than that, just read the passage, were more mindful after washing the dishes. And the effect was really quite large. And importantly, the mindful dishwashers also felt better. Mindfully washing the dishes made people feel less nervous and more inspired. And that inspiration pace is very interesting for someone who traditionally was not a fan of dishwashing. And another curious thing happened in kind of people's perception of time when they washed dishes mindfully. Time seemed to slow down for them. So mindfully dishwashing not only made people feel better, but they felt better for what seemed to them to be a longer period of time. So, washing the dishes in a slightly different way, intentionally paying attention to the temperature of the water, the smell of the soap, or the feel of a dish, can transform this everyday chore into a meditation practice. And the implications here are really interesting. These results suggest that a broad range of activities could cultivate mindfulness and make people feel better. So we don't necessarily need to add something new to busy people's lives. It's supposed to be done in this quiet, peaceful place with no distractions. People might be able to realize at least some of the benefits of mindfulness just by doing something old in a slightly different way. So if you can't find the time or the space to just sit quietly, this suggests that maybe you don't have to experience the benefits of mindfulness. And that might be a controversial idea. I'm curious Barbara's thoughts there, but that's kind of where I'm going to end today. So thank you for your time and attention, and thanks for the opportunity to share.
Thank you so much, Adam. For everybody, just a reminder who's listening live, this presentation is being recorded and will live on YouTube for you to watch over and over. I know I will want to again. And what a rich resource Adam has provided for us to improve our mental and physical health, mindfulness, even during our daily chores. I'll be washing dishes right after this, and we'll put that into practice. So if you haven't already, please grab a pen and paper to take notes. Barbara will be taking us through some mindfulness meditations, and I will turn the time over to her.
Oh, let's see, get the view here right. Okay. Having a hard time getting the view right. Okay, well, Adam, that was amazing. That was really amazing, and I agree completely with you. I thought about the old movie Karate Kid. Remember that? Wax on, wax off. I remember practicing the Zen of washing dishes in my own home and finding that it really is very beneficial and useful. And the other thing that I was thinking about as you were giving your talk, which was amazing, was that mindfulness really is strong medicine. It really is. It's really strong medicine without side effects, right? I mean, that's really amazing. And the thing, though, about it is that, like with some medicine, you have to take it for a while for it to kick in, right? It can, mindfulness does have immediate effects in calming down your nervous system, for it to really become internalized and to reduce like generalized anxiety or maybe your startle reflex or something like that. It does take some practice. It does take some practice, but practice well worth it. And do your dishes, practice doing that. So today, I want to start with a story. Many years ago, when I was actually a first year graduate student at the Graduate School of Social Work at the University of Utah, I did a practicum at one of the local hospitals in the bone marrow transplant unit. And one of my jobs was to take psychological histories from people, because you can imagine how important that is prior to going through such a procedure as a bone marrow transplant. And so one day, and this was very early into my practicum, so I was young and I didn't have a lot of skill. And anyways, I was interviewing a 16-year-old girl who had non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. And, you know, it was really sad to see such a young girl so sick. And I didn't have really great emotional boundaries at that point in my career. And so I left that interview really, I had a really heavy heart. And to be honest, I really just wanted to go home, right? Or at least escape for a while. So let me ask you a question. Have you ever, right, you have, I know you have, had a moment at work where you just wanted to go home? You just needed to escape? Well, so how can mindfulness help us in a situation like that? Well, there is a meditation called the 3-breath journey that Gil Fronsdale, who is an amazing mindfulness teacher, and I have prepared a handout and I've put links to all of this, and I've also transcribed the meditations. So it sounds just exactly like its name. It's called the 3-breath journey. And what you do is you follow your breath from the moment of inhale all the way through until the last moment of the exhale. And it's kind of like a journey. You know, it really is. If you pay attention to the breath going through the body, you really are going on a little journey. And you can embellish it. I mean, when I do it, sometimes I like to think I'm on a mountain path, right? You know, going up a hill, inhale, inhale, and then exhale, exhale, exhale. And so I thought that we could take a minute and practice, because this is something that you can do to help you out in one of those times where you just need a break. And also, it is an excellent entry meditation for somebody who's just beginning a practice. So I am going to use the singing bowl to tap it to signal the beginning of the meditation. And what I would like you to do is just simply follow your breath for 3 breaths. I'll tap the bowl when we begin, and then when we're done, I'll tap the bowl again. Ready? How was that? Well, the more you practice, the better it gets. But back to my story. I didn't know anything about the 3-breath journey or how to calm my nervous system down back when I was a first-year graduate student. And so when I was done with the interview, I took that sadness with me out into the waiting room, and I called my next patient. Mr. So-and-so, I'm ready for you. Please follow me back to my office. I didn't even look at him, right? I was young. I've learned, I know better now, but I didn't look at him. Anyways, I turned around. He followed me back into my little cubicle of an office. And I asked him to sit down, and then I shut the door like I did back in those days to provide privacy. And that's when I turned around and I looked at him. And the moment I looked at him, everything inside of me said, you shouldn't have shut that door. There was something about his energy that just really felt dangerous to me. And so then, right, have you ever had this happen to you before? My mind starts racing. What am I going to do? Oh my gosh, I shouldn't have shut the door. Just stand up and go, open the door. You can't open the door. He'll think you're afraid of you. No, I can't do that. No, just go open the door. Oh, if I open the door, he'll think I'm judging him. Open the door. I can't. What would you do in a situation like that? Well, I did not listen to my intuition. I didn't go open the door. And my intuition turned out to be right. I'm going to spare you the details of what happened in that interview, but to suffice it to say, I had legitimate concerns, and my body was telling me, you need to be concerned. So anyways, in the middle of the interview, right, he interrupts me and he looks at me right in the eye and he goes like this. He says, I'm scaring you, aren't I? And I'm like, like, okay, remain professional. Remain professional. No, you're not scaring me. And I tried to continue with the interview. Mr. So-and-so, tell me about your work experience. And he said, no, I am scaring you. And I'm like, you are not? Yes, I am. And you want to know how I can tell? Fine. How can you tell? And then he pointed at me and he said, your chest has red blotches all over it. Oh my gosh, I thought, do I have red blotches? I'm thinking to myself, do I have red blotches? Oh, no. Well, I don't even remember ending that interview. But I remember how I felt. And I remember when it was over, rushing to the bathroom, and going and looking at the mirror and seeing that my chest had big red blotches all over it. I was wearing a V-neck sweater. And so I was trying to keep a poker face, but my body was telling the truth. So what could have I done in that situation? Well, I'll tell you what I could have done. I could have ended that interview the moment that he started to intimidate me, that he was trying to unsettle me. There is a misconception about mindfulness that it makes us passive, that all of a sudden we're these passive, loving, sweet, nothing bothers us kind of people. And you know what? That can't be farther from the truth. Because what mindfulness really does is that it cuts through the emotion, it cuts through the thoughts, like Adam was showing on his screens, and it allows us to take wise action. But I didn't know anything about that back then. I didn't know anything back then about that. So, okay, fast forward a couple of months. I'm in a new practicum. It's my second year, and I now have an internship as a therapist, which is my dream come true job. I wanted to be a therapist since I was in high school. This was so important to me, right? And so I was sitting in a staff meeting one day wearing turtlenecks, and it was early September. It was so hot outside. But I was wearing turtlenecks because my red blotches had become a regular occurrence. I mean, just the slightest thing that would unnerve me even a little bit, and the red blotches would start to come out. So I'm sitting in the meeting, and my friend leans over to me and he says, "Barb, what is with the turtlenecks? It's like over 90 degrees. Aren't you suffocating?" And so I told him the story. And he listened attentively. And then he said, "I think I can help you with that." And I'm like, "Really? Anything. And he said, "Okay." Apparently, it turned out he was a student of Buddhist psychology. And he said to me, "The first thing you have to do is get rid of the turtlenecks. You've got to start wearing weather appropriate clothing." And I'm like, "Okay, all right, I get that." And then he said, "And secondly, most importantly, wait for it, you have to embrace your blotches." What? Embrace my blotches? Are you crazy? And he said, "No." He said, "To the degree that you resist or hide your blotches, you're giving your brain the message that you're still in danger. And so your brain is continuing to pump out those hormones that are causing the blotches." Oh, that's interesting. My brain thinks I'm still in danger because I am like saying, "No, I can't have these blotches," and covering up and everything like that. Okay, well, I love a good scientific explanation. I love that. But what about when I'm sitting with my clients and they're telling me their stories, and their stories are causing me to feel deeply, and the red blotches start coming out? They're going to think like, "What's up?" Right? What's up? And so he said this. He said, "Just own it. Just own it." He said, "Just tell them when you feel things deeply, you get red blotches. And so what you've just said to me has made me feel deeply. So, okay, I would do anything at this point because I so wanted to be a therapist, right? So guess what? The first time that I actually had to say something to one of my clients where I could feel the blotches coming, I said, "You might notice that I've got a lot of red blotches. And that happens when I feel things deeply. And your story really moved me." Guess what happened? My client said, "Me too. That happens to me too." So what do you think that did to our therapeutic alliance, right? Brene Brown would have been proud, right? Vulnerability, show it. It helps you to connect. So why did that work? Why did that work? So I want to read this because I want to actually make sure that I really make this clear. It worked because I quit avoiding or resisting the unpleasant evidence of my emotion. And instead, I allowed it to be present and I held it with kindness. So, in other words, I changed my relationship to that evidence of my emotion, and I made it a friend rather than a foe. And when I did that, my brain got the message, hey, it's safe, we're okay. Okay, so now, fast forward again. This time, it's time for me to give my first case presentation, a case study amongst to the whole clinical team, including the doctors, which was a little intimidating to me as a young student, right? And so as I was sitting there waiting for my name to be called, I was feeling a lot of stress. I was like, red blotches, red blotches. I was getting ready to welcome my red blotches. But then I was like, red blotches? Where are you? And then my name was called. I got up to give my presentation. No red blotches. So to this day, occasionally the red blotches do come back. And when they do, I simply say, welcome, red blotches. Nice to see you again. So I am passionate about mindfulness because I see mindfulness, and I think this supports what Adam was saying. I see mindfulness as self-literacy. Self-literacy. I mean, think about it. What would it be like if we couldn't read or write? What would it be like if we didn't know how to use a computer? And lately, we have learned the importance of media literacy, right? What would happen if you went to a country and you didn't know the language? Would you be able to get around very easily? No. Well, self-literacy is the technology, if I can use that word, technology to read ourselves. And when we can read ourselves and we know what's going on, we can intervene. We can calm ourselves down. We can settle our nervous system down. And we can also know when we're really happy, when we can take in the good and savor the good experiences, like Adam said. Right? What could be more important than that? Really? What could be more important than that? Viktor Frankl said, there is a moment between cause and effect. And in that moment lies our power. Well, mindfulness allows us to capture that moment because we can see it when we slow down long enough to watch it, to observe it. We can see that moment between cause and effect. And what's the power that he's talking about? What is that power? Well, it is the power of choice. How are we going to react? Are we going to react or are we going to respond? It's also the power of insight. And it is the power to untangle ourselves from our suffering. It is strong medicine. It is strong medicine. And it gets stronger the more that we practice. So today I want to end with a poem. It's called Limitless by Dana Falls. Sun says, be your own illumination. Wren says, sing your heart out all day long. Stream says, do not stop for any obstacle. Oak says, when the wind blows, bend easily and trust your roots to hold. Star says, what you see is one small slice of a single modest galaxy. Remember that vastness cannot be grasped by the mind. Ant says, small does not mean powerless. Silence says nothing. In the quiet, everything becomes clear. I say limitless. I say yes. Thank you.
Thank you, Barbara. Thank you for teaching us about the value and power of self-literacy, especially for your own life experience. That is so amazing. And for those listening live, just a reminder, the meditations that Barbara took us through will be sent to you in a handout, so you can have that resource for your own personal practice. They'll be sent in an email following this event. Okay, so I have some questions that have come in through the chat during our discussion today. A quick question for you, Adam, just a reminder. What was the book? Would you remind us what the book and the author was that you mentioned toward the end of your presentation?
Yes, Thich Nhat Hanh's The Miracle of Mindfulness, which is infinitely deep and also infinitely accessible. It's a beautiful, beautiful book.
Thank you. Okay, and a question for you, Barbara. We had lots of questions about how to start mindfulness. Somebody asks, should I listen to music? I can't sit still for 10 minutes. Is it okay if I move around? Is it better to listen to a guided meditation, or should it be self-directed? What's your advice for finding what works for you and getting started?
Let me just turn my video on. You know, I think that there are a number of ways to start. I think that it's really helpful to carve out maybe 5 minutes a day to begin. I think the most accessible way is to begin by focusing on your breath. But, you know, sometimes the breath is really difficult for people, especially this past year. And going through COVID and how the breath has been very difficult for people. So sometimes it's really helpful just to tune in for a few minutes to the sounds that are around your room, around you. And you just simply, whatever it is, you just want to get into that observing mind state where you are observing the sound without judgment, or you're watching your breath. I don't know. Adam, do you have anything to offer?
As a hyperactive child that was raised in sports to keep me under control, I find that movement-based practices are sometimes really accessible for folks too. Thich Nhat Hanh, also in that book, talks about mindful walking, right? Almost like kissing the earth with the feet and just sort of really being present, the movement of the body, sensation of the foot against the ground, things like this. I think movement-based practices can be helpful. Also, one that folks seem to gravitate to if they have a hard time with the breath is a body scan. Just shifting attention through the various aspects of the body, just bringing that awareness often softens things up, and it kind of gives a little more mental activity, at least by my understanding, that folks can kind of track along with. So those are a couple other ideas.
Awesome. It sounds like it's not a one size fits all, and lots of experimenting is good. A question for you, Adam, about cognitive behavioral therapy, or I guess for both of you, as you're both experts in this. The question is that it looked like cognitive behavioral therapy was not as effective of a treatment as 15 minutes of mindfulness. And so the question is that this person is curious about how CBT was used in the studies that you mentioned.
It's a great question, and also one that I'm actively responding to from a peer review as that paper is trying to get published. So it's what we did, and it may be an unfair comparison, was we tried to present kind of basic cognitive behavioral principles, right? So we have that ABC model coming from Ellis, where we have the antecedent, like in this context, it was pain. We have the beliefs, or kind of the thoughts that arise out of that moment of pain. And then we have the consequences, emotional, behavioral. And we just tried to walk people through that model and say that anytime you feel pain, kind of notice how the thought works, and then notice your responses there. But I don't think it had kind of the immediate kind of experiential potency of the meditation and the hypnosis conditions. So maybe over an 8-week treatment, CBT may be as effective, but I've been reviewing the literature on preoperative cognitive interventions to help folks, and CBT doesn't seem to do that great. There's more evidence for mindfulness and hypnosis and kind of the operative setting. So.
Okay, our next question is about specifically about work. So we've gotten quite a few questions about how mindfulness can help with a traditional work setting when instant messages, emails, calls, meetings are always pulling attention, and then how it can help in a more complicated setting of working from home. We've got all that, and family, dogs, home responsibilities pulling your attention as well. So what advice and resources can you provide for the listeners as we're all navigating this strange new work environment?
Well, working this past year mostly on Zoom, doing teletherapy with many of my clients who are seeing me from home in between working and having kids racing in and all of that kind of thing. And I can tell you that as far as working from home, sometimes what is helpful is for people to take a break for even 5 minutes. I have a client who actually goes out to her car. She goes out into her car, shuts the door, takes a piece of chocolate, and then is mindful while she eats her piece of chocolate. And, she comes back, it's not perfect, but she comes back in restored, And another thing is to try to go outside for a minute, right? Walk outside, be mindful, look around, listen for birds, look at a tree. That can settle you down. And always take time away from the screen. Take time away from the screen. Adam, what do you have? Do you have something to add to that?
Not a whole lot. Just the thought that in some ways, kind of the lived environment reminds me of sort of the body scan practice right now, where attention is constantly getting pulled back. And if we could just, the more we practice bringing attention back to kind of this object, whatever it is right now. So I'm working, dog rushes in, I'm working, fire alarm goes off. It's just that continual practice of coming back. And I think the more times we come back, the longer we're able to stay, and maybe the less disruptive those distractions become over time. So I think your point earlier about mindfulness being strong medicine and stronger medicine the more we practice, I think is really salient right there.
Yeah. Yeah. I think, that is really true, that, for mindfulness to be really helpful in the workplace, it really is helpful to have a practice, because we do need to create the neural pathways to support the ability to focus and to concentrate. And so it gets better over time. And there are a lot of apps. Actually, the Calm app is excellent for practicing at work.
So are we to understand that, like, some days it's going to be harder, some days it's going to be easier to do this practice? I asked that because a question came in that said, yesterday my meditation was easy, today it was hard. What am I doing wrong? So any insights on I guess, giving yourself patience as you're getting into this habit?
It's life, right? What we are dealing with, Ron Siegel, the psychologist, he defines mindfulness as the technology that we use to see how our minds disturb us, right? And part of that is, the suffering that what we're learning how to do over time is to be better in the moment. But even monks who practice all of the time every one of their days is not great. They still, have struggles at times. So it's life.
And just to chime in there too, I would challenge the notion of a good practice versus a bad practice. And I think sometimes the expectation of feeling a certain way can make kind of that calm and relaxation that we're often striving for a little more difficult to realize. And I don't think a bad practice, I think we learn more from a bad practice than we do from a good practice. And so I would challenge, and I challenge myself to reframe those moments of, I blew it today. I didn't do it because that happened this morning. That's just the way it goes. But again, I think we learn more from those struggles than we do from the easy spots.
Yeah, it's kind of like those blotches. We have to hold the difficulties with kindness and just say, this is what's present right now.
As with most things, it's always hard to hear that the learning comes through the difficult experiences. So comforting to know that we need to give ourselves some grace as we practice mindfulness. Unfortunately, we have to wrap up. This has been such a wonderful discussion, and I want to thank Barbara and Adam immensely for teaching us today. Thank you again to the College of Social Work for co-sponsoring our event, and we hope for those of you listening that you will continue to join us for future events. All of them are listed on the Alumni Association website at ulink.utah.edu. Thank you so much again, and we hope we'll see you next time.
Thanks for being here.